He stood in her kitchen at 5 in the morning and said, "I have to go." She looked at him across the counter and her face did the thing it did now when something hit her. One beat where everything showed before the composure came back down. He saw it, he always saw it, she said. How long? He said 90 days, maybe longer. Down the hall, 3 children were asleep and had no idea the ground was shifting under all of them. She said, "The children." He looked at her and didn't say what he wasn't asking. She looked back and answered what he hadn't asked. She said, "I'll be there." 2 weeks later, he told the children. Dae-young asked 11 questions in 4 minutes. Min Seo went still in the way she went still when she was managing something large. And Hannah looked at her father, then at Tamara, then back at her father and said, "Is Tamara staying?" The room went completely still. Every adult in it understood exactly what that question meant. Nobody was ready to answer it. Subscribe right now, because part 2 of this story is going to hit harder than part 1. And you need to be here for every single word of it. She said, "Yes, I'm staying." Hannah nodded, satisfied, world intact, GOM secure. She went back to what she was doing, because at almost 3 years old, she had asked the only question that mattered, and received the only answer that mattered, and everything else was detail. Minso looked at Tamara from across the room. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. She looked at her the way she had looked at her that first evening on the couch, with those serious dark eyes that measured everything and discarded nothing. And then she looked away, and the looking away was its own answer. Jae-won looked at Tamara last. His expression was something she didn't have a clean category for. It was too full for one word. It held the 5 a.m. kitchen and the 90 days. And Hannah's question and the answer Tamara had just given, and something beneath all of that neither of them had named yet, and both of them could feel pressing against the inside of every conversation they shared. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Don't thank me." He said, "Tamara," she said, "go pack. You have a flight." He looked at her for one more moment, then he went. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the apartment come alive around her. Dae-young's voice from his room, Hannah's feet on the floor, Min Seo's door opening. And she thought about the word staying, and what it had felt like coming out of her own mouth, and what it was going to cost her, and then she stopped calculating the cost, because she was done doing that. Some things were worth whatever they cost, and she was finished, pretending she didn't know which things those were. The morning he left was 5 a.m. and dark, and the apartment had the specific silence of a place holding its breath. The children were still asleep. She had come early. She didn't know why she had come early, except that she had, and she was standing in the kitchen making tea when he came out of his room with his bag and stopped when he saw her there. He said, "You didn't have to." She said, "I know." He set his bag down. He stood across the kitchen from her and looked at her with that face. The long scattered hair across his forehead, the soft features, the dark eyes that had been reading her accurately since a parking structure at 9 in the evening. And he said, "When I come back, I want to finish the conversation we have been not having." She looked at him. He said, "I need you to know that I am coming back to that conversation. Not just to the children, to that conversation, to you." She held his gaze for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, Atlanta was still dark, and the city that had her name on a building somewhere in it was not yet awake. And in this specific moment, it was just the two of them, standing across a kitchen with something enormous and unnamed between them, and both of them knowing it completely. She said, "Come back then." He smiled. The wild smile, arriving on his face with no warning and no apology, transforming him. The smile that had been doing complicated things to the air in every room she shared with him, since the first time she saw it in her office with food containers on her desk. He reached out and tucked one loose coil of her hair back from her temple. Just that. Just 3 seconds of his fingers at her temple. And then his car arrived, and he picked up his bag and walked to the door and opened it and stopped, with his back to her for one moment. Then he walked out. She stood in the kitchen with her hand raised slightly, where she had almost caught his wrist, and hadn't. She looked at her own hand. Then she put the kettle on because there were 3 children to get to school in 2 hours, and a company to run, and 90 days ahead of her, and she was not going to stand in this kitchen, being undone by a man's fingers at her temple. She was absolutely being undone. She just had things to do first. The first week was logistics, and Tamara Candice had always been exceptional at logistics, school drop-offs at 7:45. Daeyoung's lunch packed the specific way he required it packed, because the placement of items in his lunchbox was apparently a matter of deeply held personal principle, and she had learned this on day 2, when he had opened the box at school and called her cell phone during a board presentation to explain the problem at length. Min Seo's Wednesday after-school composition class that ran until 5 and required a specific snack waiting in the car and not a different snack and not no snack. Hana's daycare pickup at 4:30 sharp because Hana communicated displeasure at late pickup through methods that the daycare director had described in a written note as memorable. Tamara ran Candice Group from 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. and ran 3 children from 3 p.m. to 8 p.m. and worked again from 9 p.m. until midnight and slept 4 hours and did it again. She did not complain about this to anyone because she had chosen it, and she was not a woman who complained about things she had chosen. She moved through each day with the efficiency she brought everything, and underneath the efficiency was something she was not examining directly, which was that she was not tired in the way she expected to be tired. She was tired in her body. She was not tired anywhere else. She was, in the specific way she had learned to recognize, because it was so unfamiliar, running on something that was not caffeine, and not discipline, and not professional obligation. She was running on the particular fuel of a person who has somewhere real to be, and people who are waiting for them, and things that matter waiting at the end of every day. She had not run on that fuel in 10 years, and it was doing things to her that she was not ready to discuss. Dana noticed within 4 days. She came into Tamara's office on a Thursday afternoon and closed the door with the particular quiet of a woman who had something to say and had decided to say it. She sat down and looked at Tamara across the desk and said, "You rescheduled the Hartwell meeting." Tamara said, "I had a conflict." Dana said, "You rescheduled a $40 million acquisition meeting." Tamara said, "It's rescheduled, not canceled. Hartwell will wait." Dana said, "You rescheduled it to 3:15. Tamara said, "Correct." Dana said, "School pickup is 3:30. The office was quiet for a moment. Tamara said, "I am aware of my own schedule, Dana." Dana looked at her CFO look, the one that meant she was not fooled, and was not going to pretend to be fooled, and was not going to allow Tamara to pretend she wasn't fooled. She said, "You are different." Tamara said, "I'm exactly the same." Dana said, "You left a board meeting 12 minutes early last Thursday." Tamara said, "The board meeting was running over its allotted time." Dana said, "To pick up a 6-year-old from school." The office was quiet again. Tamara looked at her CFO of 4 years, the woman who had been beside her, through 2 acquisitions, and 1 boardroom coup, and 4 years of building something real, and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "He comes back in 11 weeks. Dana stood up. She said, "Good," and walked to the door. Then she stopped with her hand on the door and said without turning around, "Tamara, you're happy. I just want you to know that I see it, and it looks good on you, and you should stop being afraid of it." She opened the door and left. Tamara sat at her desk and looked at the closed door for a long time. Then she looked at her calendar. 3:15. She had built her entire professional schedule around a 3:30 pickup without noticing she had done it, and her CFO had seen it before she did. That was the most exposed she had felt in a professional context in 7 years, and it didn't frighten her the way it should have, and the fact that it didn't frightened her more than the original thing. She called Jaewon that evening at 9. He picked up on the second ring. She said, "Hana told her daycare teacher that she lives with 2 daddies and a Tamara." A pause. Then he laughed, the real laugh, the helpless one, coming through the phone from Seoul at 10 a.m. his time, and landing in her Atlanta kitchen at 9 p.m. her time, crossing the entire ocean without losing a single thing. She smiled at the kitchen wall, and did not tell him she was smiling. He said, "How is Min Seo?" She said, "She showed me a composition today. She's writing about home again." He said, "Is she?" She said, "You're in it. The children are in it." A pause. "I'm in it." He was quiet for a moment, then, "What does she say about you?" Tamara said, "She says, some people don't arrive at the beginning. They arrive exactly when they are supposed to." The line was quiet for a long time. He said, "She's 9 years old." Tamara said, "I know." He said, "Tamara," she said, "go to your meetings. I have this." She hung up and sat in the kitchen with the phone on the table, and Min Seo's sentence sitting in her chest like something that had been waiting a very long time to be said to exactly her. And here is what nobody tells you about a woman who has spent a decade being untouchable. She doesn't open slowly. She opens all at once in the spaces she wasn't watching. She was watching the school pickup schedules. She was watching the lunchbox geometry. She was watching the composition classes, and the daycare pickups, and the midnight work sessions, and she completely missed what was happening to her in every moment between. She was becoming theirs. Not performing it, not managing it, not calculating the cost and deciding the cost was acceptable. Just becoming it, the way you become things that are true, without announcement, without ceremony, without a moment you can point to and say that was when it happened. It had already happened. And the people who think that makes her weak have never understood what it actually costs a woman like Tamara Candice to let something be true without controlling what it becomes. Like this video right now. Because what is about to walk through that apartment door is going to change everything, and you will not see it coming until it is already standing in the kitchen. She arrived on a Thursday. No call, no message, no request for permission because she did not believe permission was required. A Korean woman, 58 years old, small and precisely dressed, with Soo Yan's bone structure, sharp and fine, and eyes that categorized everything within the first 3 seconds and stored it permanently. Behind her, a Korean man in his late 20s, her son Jin Woo, carrying wrapped gifts for the children with the careful presentation of someone who understood that the gifts were not the point, but that the point needed to arrive looking like gifts. Choi Myung-hee, Soo Yeon's aunt, the woman who had raised Soo Yeon after her parents died and had loved those 3 children from Seoul through photographs and video calls, and the specific grinding grief of a woman watching her grandniece and grandnephews grow up on a screen in a country she had never visited while a legal battle she had helped fund and lost stripped her of even the leverage of proximity. Tamara opened the apartment door and looked at her and understood in the first 3 seconds. Before Myung-hee said a word, before Jinwoo shifted the gifts in his arms, before anything, that this woman was not Marcus. She was not Shin Dae-ho. She was not a board member with an agenda, or a journalist with a draft, or a man with a grudge dressed up as governance. This woman loved those children with her whole body and her whole history. That made her the most dangerous person Tamara had faced in any room she had ever walked into. Because cruelty you can dismantle. Love that comes with competing claims is a different species of problem entirely. And Tamara knew it standing in that doorway and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not defensiveness and not threat, but something older and more complicated. The recognition that she was standing at the edge of someone else's grief, and she had no map for this territory. She said, "Come in." The children's reactions told the whole story faster than any conversation could. Dae-young didn't fully remember her, but ran toward the warmth she offered the way he always ran toward warmth. Completely, without reservation, all of himself extended toward anyone who opened their arms. He hit Myung-hee at speed in the hallway, and she caught him and held him with the practiced ease of a woman who had caught children at speed her whole life and she held him for a moment longer than the greeting required, and her eyes closed briefly while she held him. Hana studied the new arrival with the focused professional suspicion she brought to all new people. 4 full minutes of assessment, during which Myung-hee wisely did not push, did not reach, did not perform warmth she hadn't yet earned. She simply held out a small stuffed animal without ceremony or expectation, and Hana took it and examined it, and then tucked it under her arm beside Gam without comment and moved on because Hana's approval was never announced, only demonstrated. Min-seo walked to her, not ran, walked. With the measured, deliberate steps of a 9-year-old who had been managing her emotions with the discipline of someone 3 times her age, and was approaching something she had not been sure she was allowed to want. She stood in front of Myung-hee, and Myung-hee looked down at her, and Min-seo looked up at her, and then Min-seo put her arms around her waist and pressed her face against her chest and held on. Quietly, briefly, with the complete precision of a child, releasing exactly as much as she had decided to release, and not one fraction more. Tamara watched this from the kitchen doorway. She watched Min-seo hold this woman who smelled like soul, who carried Su Yeon's face in her bone structure, who had been loving these children from a distance for 2 years. And she felt something move through her that she had not braced for. Not jealousy, not threat, something more honest than either of those things. The recognition that these children had roots she could not give them, history she had not been present for, a family that existed before a parking structure, and would exist after everything she and Jaewon were building together. She had no claim on any of that. She could show up every day for the rest of her life, and she would never be what Myung-hee was to them. That was not a competition she was in. That was just true. She served tea correctly. She had been practicing for weeks, and she served it correctly, and she watched Myung-hee noticed that she had served it correctly, and she watched Myung-hee file that information without reacting to it. Then Myung-hee sent the children to their rooms with Jin-woo, and the apartment went quiet, and the two of them sat across from each other at the kitchen table. And Myung-hee looked at her and said in careful, precise, fully intentional English, "Tell me who you are to these children. Not hostile, not cruel. Direct in the way of a woman who had flown from Seoul without calling, and had not traveled this far to discuss anything except the specific thing she had come to discuss." Tamara looked back at her and said, "I'm still working that out." Myung-hee held her gaze without blinking. Then she said, "Suyeon left them, she left Jaewon, she left all of us." Her voice was controlled, and something beneath the control was not controlled, and had not been controlled in 2 years. I will never understand why she did what she did. I will carry that question until I die. A pause that had weight. But these children have Korean blood, Korean history, a family in Seoul who has loved them every single day they have been alive. And you... She looked at Tamara with an expression that was not cruelty, but was adjacent to something that didn't need to be. You are very far from all of that. The kitchen was quiet. Tamara sat with it. She did not reach for the defense. She did not reach for the professional composure that had carried her through boardrooms and acquisition tables and every room that had tried to make her feel like she didn't belong in it. She sat with Myung-hee's words, the way you sit, with things that are true and uncomfortable and need to be sat with. Then she said, "You're right. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." She looked at her directly. "I'm not Korean. I don't have their history. I can't give them soul or their language or their grandmother's face in their bone structure. I know that." A pause. "What I can tell you is that Min-seo opened her bedroom door 3 months ago and hasn't closed it since. Dae-young sleeps through the night. Hana knows she is safe in the specific way. Children know they are safe when the adults around them mean it." She held Myung-hee's gaze without flinching. "Not because of me. Because their father chose them every single day under circumstances that should have broken him, and I am the person who happened to knock on his window. That's the whole of what I am." Myung-hee was still. From down the hall came Hannah's voice, directing Jin-woo through a game whose rules she had invented herself and was adjusting in real time and expected full compliance with, despite the adjustments being mid-play and non-negotiable. Something moved across Myung-hee's face, something very small and very human and completely beyond her control. For approximately 2 seconds before she controlled it again, the visit ended without resolution and without disaster. Gifts were given. The children were embraced. Jin-woo smiled at Tamara, the smile of a man who was gathering information and calling it friendliness. Myung-hee said nothing further, and nothing more was needed. After they left, Tamara closed the door and stood in the hallway for a full minute. Then she called Jae-won. He answered before the first ring completed. She said she came. He said, I know. I'm sorry, I should have warned you. She said, she loves them. He was quiet. She said, that's not something to be sorry about. A pause. Jin-woo is a different conversation. He said, what did he do? She said, nothing yet. She let that sit for a moment. But he will. She was right. And she knew she was right, and he knew she was right. And both of them sat with that knowledge. Through 3 seconds of transatlantic silence, he said, Tamara, she said, finish your meetings. I have this. He said, you keep saying that. She said, because I keep meaning it. She hung up and went to check on the children, and found Hana in the hallway holding both Gom and the new stuffed animal Myung-hee had brought, and narrating a complex social situation between the two of them that appeared to involve a legal dispute and a cooking competition simultaneously. Tamara sat down on the hallway floor in her expensive trousers and listened to the entire thing. This was her life now. She would not trade it for anything she had built. Jinwoo moved in 48 hours. He was not his mother, and he had never pretended to be. Mung-hee's grief was genuine, and her love was genuine, and her arrival in Atlanta was the action of a woman who needed to see those children with her own eyes. Jinwoo had come for different reasons, and had been building toward them before the plane landed. He had Marcus's number through 3 connections, and he made 2 calls, and by the second call he had a meeting. They sat across from each other in a hotel lobby. Jinwoo in his late 20s, with his mother's cheekbones, and none of her substance. Marcus in his expensive exit and his 4-year grudge. And they shared what they had with the specific efficiency of 2 people who understood that they wanted the same outcome through different doorways. Jinwoo had the family angle. Korean children, Korean heritage, a grieving Korean family being systematically excluded from those children's lives by a woman with no blood connection, no legal standing, no cultural claim, nothing except daily presence, and a lease arrangement that had started as charity and become something nobody had authorized. Marcus had the professional angle, a restructured board, a CEO whose personal life had become a recurring public story, a journalist who had been sitting on a loaded draft for months waiting for new material. They called Shin Dae-ho together. Shin Dae-ho had been waiting. He picked up on the first ring. The story went live on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m. And it was constructed with the precision of something that had been assembled over time by people who understood exactly where to put the blade. It was worse than the first draft. Worse because it had moved past implication into specificity. It had photographs. Myung-hee and Jin-woo at the apartment building, front desk being told to wait by a staff member. Someone on staff had taken that photograph and sold it, and that person would be identified, and that would be its own conversation later. It had Jin-woo's statement about Korean children being denied meaningful access to their Korean family by the deliberate choices of a woman who had inserted herself into their lives through financial leverage. It had a quote from a former Candace Group board member, unnamed, identifiable to anyone who had followed the story, about instability and compromised professional judgment, and a CEO who had allowed her personal life to become a liability. And it had Shin Dae-ho's own voice, threading it together into a narrative that was not technically false in any individual sentence and was completely designed to destroy in its totality. Tamara read it at her desk at 6:50 a.m. She had been in the building since 6. She read it once straight through. Then she put her phone face down on the desk and sat completely still for 60 seconds. In those 60 seconds, she made several decisions. She was not going to respond to the article publicly. She was not going to issue a statement. She was not going to call investors or schedule a press conference or demonstrate that the story had landed with enough force to require a defensive response. She was going to do the thing that Marcus and Jinwoo and Shindae-ho had not accounted for, because they had built their strategy around the version of Tamara Candice, who fought every battle publicly and won every battle publicly. They had not accounted for the version of Tamara Candice, who had sat across a kitchen table from Choi Myung-hee, and recognized the difference between a woman running an agenda and a woman carrying grief. She picked up her phone and called J1. He answered on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he already knew. He said, "I've seen it," she said. "Who told you?" He said, "My sole attorney called an hour ago. Tamara, I'm coming home. I'm booking the flight right now," she said. J1. He said, "No. Listen to me. They used my children. They used my family's grief. They used you." "I am not sitting in Seoul," she said. Jae-won, "listen to me." He stopped. She said, "I need you to hear exactly what I am saying. I need you to finish what you went to Seoul to finish. I need that inheritance settled completely and legally and without any remaining contestable thread, because the moment you come back before that is Dun Jin-woo has an argument that your personal instability affected your legal judgment, and I will not give him that argument. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" He was breathing hard on the other end of the phone. She could hear him working against his own instinct, which was to get on a plane, and she understood that instinct, and she respected it, and she was not going to let him act on it. He said 3 weeks. She said 3 weeks. He said, "You call me every day." She said, "I call you every day." He said, "If anything happens to the children," she said, "nothing is going to happen to the children. The children are in school right now. Hana is in daycare. Min Siu has composition class Wednesday. I have all of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tamara," she said. "Yes." He said, "I hate that you have to do this alone," she said. "I know." A pause that had more in it than either of them was saying. "But I have it. And when you come back, we are going to finish the conversation, and then we are going to deal with Jinwoo and Marcus and Shin Dae-ho together. All of it. Together." She let that word sit. "Finish your meetings." She hung up. She sat at her desk in the quiet of an office that had her name on the glass of the building it was in, and she thought about together, and what it meant, and how long it had been since that word had applied to her life in any real sense. And then she picked up her phone and called Myung-hee. She said, "Come back to the apartment. Just you, not Jinwoo." A pause. Myung-hee said, "When?" Tamara said, "Today." Myung-hee came that afternoon. She came alone as requested, and she sat at the kitchen table, and Tamara sat across from her, and this time Tamara spoke first, and she spoke without preparation and without armor, because armor was the wrong instrument for this conversation. She said, "I know you didn't authorize what Jinwoo did. I know the difference between a woman who loves children and a man running an agenda. You are not the same person, and I am not going to treat you like you are." Myung-hee was still. Tamara said, "I also know that you have a right to those children that I don't have. I'm not going to argue with that, or around it, or through it. It's true." She looked at her directly across the table. "What I'm going to tell you is what I know to be true about those 3 children right now, in this moment. Minso opened her bedroom door 3 months ago and hasn't closed it since. Before that, it was closed every night for 2 years. Daeyoung laughs without checking first to see if it's allowed. Hannah has never once in her life checked whether her presence is welcome before walking into a room, and I think that is the greatest gift her father ever gave her." She paused. "I didn't give them those things. Jae-won did. I am not taking credit for what that man built in impossible circumstances. She held Meng-hee's gaze. But I was there. Every day. I showed up every day. And I am going to keep showing up every day. And I need you to understand that my showing up is not a threat to what you are to them. It was never that. Myung-hee sat with that for a long moment. The apartment was quiet. Outside the window, Atlanta moved in the afternoon light. Then Myung-hee said, Soo Yeon would have liked you. Her voice was precise and controlled, and something underneath it had been broken for 2 years, and was not fully fixed and might never be fully fixed. She liked people who said the true thing without putting a dress on it first. It was not forgiveness. It was not a declaration of acceptance. It was a locked door becoming a closed one, and that was enough because closed doors could be knocked on, and Tamara Candace had learned that knocking on doors was something she could do. She said, Your son is going to stop. Whatever you need to say to him to make that happen, I trust you to say it. Myung-hee looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the gravity of a woman, making a commitment she intended to keep. She kept it. Whatever Myung-hee said to Jin-woo in whatever hotel room or phone call or conversation that followed, Jin-woo did not contact Marcus again. He did not speak to Shin Dae-ho again. He packed his bags and flew back to Seoul 4 days later, and Marcus was left sitting in his exit package with his grudge and no remaining ammunition, and Shin Dae-ho's story cycle ran out of fuel and died without a second chapter. And Tamara had done all of it without a press conference, without a statement, without a defensive move of any kind. She had done it by sitting across a kitchen table from a grieving woman and telling her the true thing without dressing it up. Drop a comment right now and tell me. Was Tamara right to handle Myung-hee alone, or should she have waited for Jae-won? Because this comment section is about to split completely down the middle, and I want every single opinion in it. 3 weeks later, Jae-won landed on a Friday evening, and Tamara did not go to the airport. She stayed at the apartment because Min Seo had said, not asked, said, with the quiet certainty of a 9-year-old who had decided this was how it was going to be here when he gets back. And Min-soo saying something directly was still new enough and significant enough that Tamara would have rescheduled anything to honor it. She heard the key in the lock. Dae-young hit him in the hallway at full speed, the way he hit everyone he loved. Without reservation, all of himself extended, no calculation, pure feeling. Jae-won caught him and swung him up, and Dae-young grabbed his neck and talked directly into his ear at high volume about every significant event of the past 3 weeks in no particular order and with no apparent plan to stop. Hana arrived 4 seconds behind Dae-young, running, demanding to be picked up immediately and beginning her own briefing, which was louder than Dae-young's and covered different material, and did not acknowledge that Dae-young was already speaking, because Hannah did not acknowledge competing broadcasts. Jae-won picked her up with his other arm and stood in the hallway holding both of them, and the hallway was loud and full and completely alive, and he closed his eyes for a moment, and Tamara watched him close his eyes and exhale, and she felt that exhale in her own chest. Min Seo came out of her room last. She walked to him the way she did everything important, without rushing, measuring each step, making sure she was certain before she committed. She stood in front of him and looked up at him, and he looked down at her over the heads of the other two who were still talking simultaneously, and something passed between them that didn't need words and had never needed words, and she put her arms around his waist and pressed her face against him and held on. He wrapped his free arm around her and held all 3 of them, and the apartment was full of noise, and underneath all the noise was a silence between father and daughter that was the quietest and fullest thing in the room. Then he looked up. He saw Tamara standing in the kitchen doorway, with her arms loosely crossed, and her face doing the thing it did now. The unguarded thing, the thing she had stopped trying to prevent. And he looked at her across the apartment, across the children, across the weeks, and his Face did the thing it did when something mattered to him completely and could not be qualified or contained. He said, "Hi." She said, "Hi." Dae-young said, "Are you going to hug her?" Jae-won laughed. Tamara laughed. Min-seo looked at Dae-young with the closed eyes, expression of someone surrounded by people with no understanding of atmosphere and personal space, and the appropriate pacing of significant moments. He set Hana down. He crossed the apartment. He put both arms around Tamara and held her, and she turned her face into his neck and held him back, and it was the first time they had held each other like this. Properly, completely, without the careful management of distance. And it felt exactly like something that had been scheduled before either of them knew what it was. Dae-young said finally. Min-seo walked back to her room and closed the door, and the closed door was not what it used to be. The closed door was now the door of a girl who needed a moment to feel something privately, and would open it again when she was ready. She opened it 6 minutes later. That night after the children were asleep, they sat on the balcony, and the city was spread below them, and it was the same coordinates as always, and nothing about it was the same at all. He said, "I want to say the thing." She said, "Jae-won," he said, "let me say it." She was quiet. He turned to face her and said, "I love you. Not because of what you did for my children, while I was gone though. I will spend a long time figuring out how to carry that. Not because of the parking structure or the boardroom or any single moment I can point to. Because of who you are on this balcony. Because of who you are in that kitchen. Because of who you are when no one needs anything from you, and you are just here, and you are enough just being here." He looked at her directly. "I love you and I am not going anywhere, and I need you to stop waiting for me to." She looked at the city for a long time. Then she looked at him and said, "I love you. I have been trying not to for approximately 4 months. I was not successful. I am done trying." He smiled. She smiled. He took her hand and she turned her hand over and held his back, and they stayed like that for a long time, and the city made its sounds, and the night was warm, and there was nothing left to be not said. And for the people who think she should have said it first. This woman waited 10 years to say it at all. The timing was exactly right. It was always going to be exactly right when it happened, on that balcony with that city below them. And that man beside her, and everything they had, built together, sitting in the warm Atlanta air. 3 weeks after that, she sat in her office at 6:50 a.m. with a pharmacy bag on her desk. She had been certain for 5 days. She had bought the test 6 days ago and not opened it for one of them, because she had needed that day to be alone with the knowledge before it became a fact she had to act on. She had run Candace Group and picked up children and sat on the balcony and cooked badly and laughed in the kitchen and held a man's hand, and she had done all of it while carrying this knowledge in the part of herself where she put things she wasn't ready to look at directly. She opened the test. 2 lines. She put it on the desk and sat back and looked at it and did not move for a long time. She thought about a hospital at 27. An empty apartment. Day 3. Going back to work because sitting still meant feeling what she was feeling, and feeling it alone was not something she had been able to survive in stillness. She thought about what she had built in the years since. The glass with her name on it. The boardroom she had walked into and dismantled from the head of the table. The company that had her name in it. All of it real. All of it hers. All of it constructed with the specific intention of being enough on its own, because she had decided nothing else was available to her. She thought about a man with scattered hair, who had said, "I am not going anywhere," with the complete and specific certainty of a person who has never once found staying difficult. She thought about 3 children, a 9-year-old's composition, a 6-year-old running at full speed. A toddler's hand extended upward, holding a one-eyed bear. She picked up her phone. She called him. He answered it on the second ring. She said, "Are you at the apartment?" He said, "Yes." She said, "I'm coming over." He said, "Everything okay?" She said, "I don't know yet." She drove over and he opened the door before she knocked, which meant he had been watching for her car, which meant the "I don't know yet" had told him enough. The children were at school. The apartment was quiet with the particular weight of a space preparing for something. She came in. She stood in the kitchen. She put the test on the counter between them. He looked at it. He looked at her. She watched his face with the complete and terrified attention of a woman who had been here before, who had stood in a different kitchen in a different life with a different man, and watched his face and seen the calculation begin. The working out of cost, the measuring of exit, the particular quality of silence that meant someone was arranging their words to leave. She had watched that face for the last time at 27, and she had sworn she would never watch another face in that moment again. And she had kept that promise for 10 years by making sure she was never in a position to need to. She was in that position. She watched his face. His face did not do any of those things. He looked at the test and he looked at her, and his expression was not shock and not calculation and not the careful neutral of a man buying time to decide what kind of person he was going to be. It was something moving through him from the inside. Something that was not arriving from the outside in, but rising from somewhere deep in him. Something that looked like a man seeing the shape of the thing he had been building toward. Before he knew what it was going to be called when it arrived, he said, "Come here." She didn't move. He stepped toward her and took both her hands and held them, and looked directly at her, and his voice was completely steady when he said, "I told you I'm not going anywhere. I need you to hear that as the specific thing it is, not something I'm saying because of what is sitting on that counter. Not comfort. Not performance. A fact about who I am and what I do." He held her hands and did not look away. "I stayed with children who were not my blood because they needed a father and I was there. Staying is not something I have to decide to do. It is what I do. It is who I am." He squeezed her hands. "I am here. I am staying. And this." He looked at her hands in his and then back at her face. "This is the best thing that has happened in this kitchen, and a great many good things have happened in this kitchen." She looked at him. He said, "Are you scared?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Of me leaving?" She said, "Yes." He said, "Look at me." She was already looking at him. He said, "I am not him. I have never been him. I need you to let yourself know that. Not believe it. Know it. The way you know the things that are simply true." Something broke open in her chest that was not pain. It was the opposite of pain. It was what lives on the other side of pain, when you have stopped bracing for it and let it pass, and discovered that you survived it, and that the space it leaves is clear and warm and solid, and can hold things you stopped believing it could hold. She closed her eyes. He put his arms around her. She let him hold her in that kitchen. The kitchen that had started as a professional arrangement and become the center of everything, and she held him back and breathed and felt safe. Not saved, not rescued, safe. The specific safety of a person who has been seen completely and is still being held. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at the counter and the test on it, and she thought, "This time is different. This time the apartment she goes home to will not be empty. This time there is a man in this kitchen who says I am staying and has been proving it in every possible way since a parking structure at 9 in the evening. This time March 14th will not be a date she maintains a silence around at significant personal cost. This time she knocked and the door opened and she walked through it. Dana found out the following Monday because Dana always found out. She came into the office and closed the door and sat down and looked at Tamara and said, "You're glowing." Tamara said, "It's the lighting." Dana said, "Tamara." Tamara looked at her CFO of 4 years and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need to restructure my schedule for the next several months. I need the company to be able to run without me physically present every day." Quietly, structurally. Dana looked at her. Understanding moved across her face slowly and then all at once. She said, "How long have you known?" Tamara said, 10 days. Dana said, "Does he know?" Tamara said, he was the first person I told. Dana said nothing for a long moment. Then she stood up and said, good, and walked to the door and stopped. She said without turning around, I have been watching you run this company for 4 years, and I have watched you be extraordinary at it, and I have watched you be alone in it. And I want you to know that what I see right now in this office is better than extraordinary. She opened the door. It's enough. She left. Tamara sat at her desk and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling glass and thought about enough and what it meant, and how long she had been operating on the belief that enough was something she had to build alone, and how completely and permanently that belief had been dismantled by 3 children, and one man, and a parking structure at 9 in the evening. Myung-hee was still in Atlanta. She had not gone back to Seoul after Jin-woo left. She had extended her stay without explanation or announcement, and she had been coming to the apartment on Saturday mornings. And Jae-won had said yes, and Tamara had made sure the kitchen was full and had said nothing further because Myung-hee's presence in those children's lives was not Tamara's to negotiate. On one of these Saturdays, Myung-hee arrived and Tamara opened the door, and Myung-hee looked at her face and then briefly, and with the trained eyes of a woman who had carried 3 pregnancies of her own, briefly, quickly, only once, at the rest of her. She said nothing. She came in. She sat with the children with the particular ease she had developed over these weeks. Dae-young climbing on her without apology. Hana conducting a detailed property negotiation that involved Myung-hee's handbag. Min Siu sitting close enough to be present without demanding anything. Myung-hee moved through it all with the ease of a woman who had been a mother and a grandmother and an aunt, and understood that children required presence, not performance. She watched Jae-won and Tamara in the kitchen. She watched the way he touched the small of her back when he passed behind her without thinking about it. She watched the way Tamara moved the kettle before he asked. She watched the way they existed in the same space with the specific, unremarkable ease of people who have learned each other's rhythms so completely that the rhythms have stopped being something they manage and have become something they simply are. Ma Young-hee's expression during this watching was the expression of a woman updating information she had previously filed under a different category. Before she left, she stopped at the door. She said to Tamara, quietly, below the volume of the apartment, below Dae-young's noise and Hana's ongoing monologue and the general productive chaos of a Saturday, Jin-woo will not be a problem again. I have handled that personally. Tamara said, thank you. Myung-hee said, I have not changed every opinion I arrived in Atlanta with. Her voice was careful and honest in the way she was always careful and honest. But I came here to see if those children were loved. She looked toward the kitchen where Jae-won was washing dishes, while Hana stood on a step stool beside him, providing detailed running critique of his technique. They are loved. A pause long enough to mean something. The rest I am still deciding. She left. Tamara stood in the doorway after the sound of the elevator was gone and understood that this was not finished. Myung-hee was a woman with deep roots and genuine love, and a grief that was still shaping itself, and a family and soul that had opinions, and a son whose ambitions she had stopped this time and might not stop the next time. She was not done. This story was not done. But tonight the apartment was warm, and Dae-young was somewhere losing a card game to Min Seo for the second time this week, and refusing to accept the verdict, and Hana had fallen asleep on the kitchen floor between one activity and the next, and Jae-won was picking her up with the practiced ease of a man who had been doing this specific thing for almost 3 years. Tamara watched him carry Hana to her room and came behind him and stood in the doorway while he laid her down and pulled the blanket up and found Gom and pressed him into her arm and stood over her for a moment the way he stood over all of them when he thought no one was watching, with that complete and undefended love that had no performance in it anywhere. He turned and saw Tamara in the doorway. They looked at each other across the small room over the sleeping child. He came to her, and she stepped back into the hallway, and he pulled the door to, and they stood in the hallway, and he said, "She's going to come around." Tamara said, he said, "She will. She just needs time to understand that loving those children and loving what we are building, Dawn, have to compete with each other." He looked at her. "She's not a bad person," Tamarata said. "I know she's not," he said. "Then we give her time." She looked at him in the hallway light and said, "Jaewon," he said. "Yes," she said. "We need to tell the children soon." He looked at her. Something moved across his face. That wild smile arriving at the corner of his mouth and spreading outward until his whole face was it. The smile that had been arriving without permission. Since the first time she caught it in her office with food containers on her desk. He said, "Minseo already knows." Tamara stared at him. He said, "She asked me 2 days ago if the new baby would share her room. I told her we hadn't discussed rooms. She said good because she wants the room next to the baby's, so she can hear if it cries at night." Tamara stood in the hallway and looked at him and laughed. Genuinely. From somewhere real and deep and unbothered. The kind of laughter that your whole body produces when something is so exactly right that your whole body has to respond to it. He laughed too. The real laugh. The helpless one. And the hallway was full of it, and down the hall 3 children slept. 3 children who had already lost much and found their footing, and were about to have their world made larger by one more person who would be loved before they arrived. Later she sat on the balcony alone for a few minutes, while he gave Hana her 4th goodnight of the evening, which was a negotiation. Hana conducted, with great creative persistence, and no intention of conceding any ground. She looked at the city, the empire, the glass with her name on it, somewhere in that skyline. She thought about a parking structure. 3 handprints. A window rolled down 3 inches, and a man who looked at her like he had already decided to survive whatever she was about to do. She thought about what was coming. Myung-hee, still deciding. The unfinished business of grief and family and competing love that had no clean resolution available. The shape of a life that was going to be larger and more complicated and more completely alive than anything she had built. Alone. She was not afraid. Jaewon came out onto the balcony and sat beside her, and his shoulder was against hers, and he took her hand, and she held his back, and the city moved below them, and the night was warm, and everything that was unresolved was still unresolved, and everything that was settled, and she understood finally and completely the difference between the two. She said, "Myung-hee is not finished." He said, "No." She said, "Part 3 is going to be harder than this." He said, "Probably." She looked at him. He looked back. She said, "Are you ready?" He smiled. The wild smile. The one that had been arriving without permission since the beginning, and that she had stopped trying to defend herself against. He said, "I've been ready since a parking structure at 9 in the evening." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the city. Then she smiled too. Subscribe right now and drop your comment, because Myung-hee is not on a plane back to Seoul, and what she is deciding is going to determine everything about part 3, and the battle that is coming is going to be the hardest one yet. Tell me below, is Myung-hee a villain or a woman who loves those children so much she doesn't know how to share them? Because that answer matters more than you think right now. Like this video, subscribe, and come back because this story has one more chapter, and it is going to break you open in the best possible way.